Thank you, Luanya, for that introduction, which I didn't understand. Thank you, Elena and Alexander and Anna, for inviting me here, and thank you particularly for persuading the Russian consulate that I was not an enemy of the state and I was allowed to have a visa to enter Russia. I'm going to talk to you about HIV and the heart. And what I'd like to leave you with is the idea that HIV infection, even in the treatment era, is associated with a greater risk of heart disease related to inflammatory indices, inflammatory markers, and as such is a good model for studying the determinants of atherosclerotic heart disease, even in the general population. This is my conflict of interest statement. I have a brother who's a cardiologist. His name is Robert. And we've been competing for our parents' attention for the past 50 years. All right. You probably all know that the advent of antiretroviral treatment has changed the outlook for persons with HIV disease. What used to be an infection that invariably led to morbidity, infections, and death has been changed by our ability to control viral replication with antiretroviral drugs, such that nowadays opportunistic infections are very rare, and the life expectancy of persons with HIV disease who are treated early in infection comes close to the life expectancy in the general population. However, we still see in the era of antiretroviral therapy an increase in the frequency of age-related complications. And it's not entirely clear what the critical drivers of these complications is. Some are related to intercurrent risks like smoking, which is more frequent in our population. But it's clear that many of these complications are affected by the inflammatory state, which is heightened in persons with HIV infection. And today, I'm going to talk about cardiovascular disease, because you're all cardiologists. This is a study that our group did a few years ago that looked at levels of inflammatory markers, interleukin-6, IP-10, which is an interferon-inducing protein, tumor necrosis factor receptors, soluble CD14, which is shed from the surface of monocytes, and coagulation markers, D-dimers, markers of ongoing thrombosis and thrombolysis. And in this forest plot, you can see that high levels of each of these indices was associated with a greater risk of death, as much as 20-fold in the interquartile range for interleukin-6, and heart disease, MI, and stroke, which for IL-6 was 2-fold increase per interquartile range. The top bar represents the unadjusted variable, and the second bar in each group represents, I don't see, oh, there it goes. The second bar represents the same index, IL-6, adjusted for circulating CD4 T cell count. And you can see that the CD4 T cell count didn't make much of a difference. The critical determinant was the levels of inflammatory and coagulation markers in the plasma. So, how and why does this happen? Well, it turns out that the drivers, the likely drivers of inflammation in HIV disease are complex and multiple. I'm only going to talk about 3 of them here: microbial translocation, co-pathogens, specifically cytomegalovirus, and fats. These others are likely important too, but I'm not going to talk about them. All right. Microbial translocation. Early in HIV infection, the gut mucosal immune system is profoundly depleted by HIV. CD4 T cells in the gut are the prime target for HIV, and they are killed by ongoing viral replication. This results in a diminished barrier to control of microbial elements, such that pieces of microbes present within the lumen of the gut make it across the gut barrier and into the systemic circulation. And we can measure these microbial elements in plasma, and they are directly linked to immune activation and inflammation. Fats, when oxidized, as you learned yesterday, can drive immune activation, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And I'll also talk about co-pathogens such as cytomegalovirus. So here's the story that I'm going to tell you. The inflammatory and procoagulant environment in HIV infection, treated or not, increases the risk of cardiovascular disease through this conspiracy between monocytes that are activated and CD8 positive T cells. These cells accumulate on the vascular endothelium, where they cause damage to the endothelial barrier and also form and participate in the formation of plaque. You haven't heard too much about CD8 T cells, and I think that's going to be part of the novelty of the story that we talk about. This is a PET scan of the heart and aorta of a person who had this. On the left, we have a person who does not have HIV infection. Focus on the bottom panel, and a person with HIV infection with controlled viremia. The positive uptake reflects uptake of glucose, of the fluorodeoxyglucose, in all likelihood uptake by cells of the monocytic series lineage. And you can see that there's an infiltration of monocytes, presumably monocytes, in the vascular wall of the aorta of the HIV positive patient that we don't see in the uninfected control. So we have some reason to believe that there's an infiltration of monocytes in situ in the vascular wall of persons who have treated HIV infection. Let's look at monocytes. We can evaluate monocytes by flow cytometry according to the expression of CD16 and CD14. Here is a panel of an HIV negative person, with most of the monocytes being CD14 positive and CD16 negative. Here are 3 examples from HIV positive persons where we can see an increase in the frequency of monocytes of a patrolling phenotype. Those are CD16 high, CD14 dim, patrolling monocytes, and inflammatory monocytes, CD16 intermediate, CD14 positive. What's important about these cells that are increased in HIV disease is that they're enriched for a receptor called CX3CR1. That's the fractalkine receptor, and what the fractalkine receptor does is it allows cells to accumulate on the endothelium because the endothelium is positive for fractalkine. So this is a tethering receptor for immune cells. Now, monocytes can be induced to be inflammatory by exposure to microbial products. That's what they do. And here on this plot, we have the effects of 2 different microbial elements. These are toll-like receptor ligands, M3-CSK4, and bacterial lipopolysaccharide that increase expression of interleukin 8, interleukin 1 beta, interleukin 6, IL-10, and the TNF assay didn't work in this one, but it works in most of our other assays. And we can see that exposure to these microbial products persuades monocytes to elaborate soluble mediators, soluble cytokines. But it does more than that. This is a schematic of tissue factor, an element that you heard about before. Tissue factor is expressed on the surface of monocytes, endothelial cells, and platelets. And what tissue factor does is it activates factor 7 to become a more active protease, which cleaves factor 10 and initiates the extrinsic cascade that ultimately results in the cleavage and formation of thrombin that results in the formation of fibrin, again by cleavage. Remember thrombin. Thrombin is an important player in this story, and remember the tissue factor on the surface of monocytes will activate expression and formation of thrombin. What happens when monocytes C microbial elements. Well, here we see some plots of tissue factor on the y-axis in monocytes that are unstimulated, low-level tissue factor. When we stimulate with bacterial lipopolysaccharide, a toll-like receptor 4 agonist, we have upregulation of tissue factor on monocytes, and likewise with bacterial flagellin, a toll-like receptor 5 agonist, we have upregulation of tissue factor. What is the expression of tissue factor on the three populations of monocytes that we can find in circulation in several different clinical settings? In this graph, we have the frequency of cells expressing tissue factor among the traditional or classical monocytes in HIV-positive negative patients, HIV-positive patients with controlled viremia, HIV-positive patients with uncontrolled viremia in black, and two different sets of controls. We can see that in these two HIV-positive populations, expression of tissue factor on inflammatory and controlling monocytes is increased. Now, that's not the really interesting part of it. Well, it is interesting, but let me put this in context. We also see in the green here, we see the expression of tissue factor on the surface of inflammatory and controlling monocytes in HIV-negative people experiencing an acute myocardial infarction. Now, these people are sick. They're having a myocardial event. These people are not sick. They're just walking around. They feel fine. And they are chronically exposed to monocytes that have procoagulant because of their high expression of tissue factor that activates the extrinsic coagulation cascade. So, said that bacterial LPS activates expression of tissue factor on monocytes. It also makes monocytes look more inflammatory. Here we have the medium control, CD16, CD14, classic monocytes. When they're exposed to bacterial lipopolysaccharide, they become more inflammatory. But the same thing happens when they get exposed to oxidized lipids. This is oxidized LDL. LDL that is non-oxidized doesn't do that, but oxidized LDL makes these cells look more inflammatory. Now, oxidized LDL and bacterial LPS also increase expression of tissue factor. So here we see that oxidized LDL, but not LDL, upregulates tissue factor expression on both classical and inflammatory monocytes. Doesn't seem to affect the controlling monocytes all that much. Just to demonstrate that the oxidation state of our patients with treated HIV infection is abnormal, if we measure oxidized LDL levels in plasma using a broad ISO, we can see that in both patients with controlled viremia and patients with uncontrolled viremia, we have elevated levels of oxidized LDL in plasma compared to healthy controls. These are persons at risk for cardiovascular disease, and these are persons, interestingly, who are experiencing acute MI. Their oxidized LDL levels are not high. Importantly, the levels of oxidized LDL are correlated with plasma levels of soluble CD14, a marker of monocyte activation, correlated with tissue factor levels on controlling monocytes, and also with Framingham risk. All right, so just to summarize where we stand with monocytes in HIV disease, the numbers of inflammatory and controlling monocytes are increased in HIV infection, whether people are treated with antivirals or not. They elaborate inflammatory cytokines in response to bacterial products, such as lipopolysaccharide and oxidized low-density lipoproteins. They're enriched for expression of tissue factor that activates coagulation, and they express the fractalkine receptor, CX3CR1, that lets them, in principle, accumulate on the vascular endothelium. I haven't shown you that that happens, but in principle, that's what would happen in cells expressing CX3CR1. And in data that I haven't shown you, soluble monocyte markers are linked to cardiovascular disease in treated HIV infection. All right, so I told you that this was a conspiracy. I've already shown you some reasons why monocytes can get us into trouble in HIV disease. What about the CD8 T cell? You probably haven't heard a lot about CD8 T cells in HIV infection because we focused on the low numbers of CD4s. But we think that CD8 T cells play an important role in some of these risks, and I'll show you why we think so. First off, the numbers of circulating CD8 T cells in patients with treated HIV infection are dramatically expanded. On average, they're twice as high as the numbers of circulating CD8 T cells in healthy controls. These patients have been on antiviral treatment for a median of 5 to 7 years, and they still have high numbers of CD8 T cells. Now, what's the significance of CD8 T cell expansion in HIV disease? Well, one, the cells that are expanded are mature, they've gone long on the path of differentiation, they're often senescent, but they're still capable of robust expression of inflammatory cytokines. Why are they expanded? Well, you'd think that maybe they're HIV reactive, but the answer is, in the setting of treatment, they are not. Only a small proportion of the expanded CD8 T cells can be demonstrated to react to HIV peptides, so they're not HIV-specific CD8 T cells at all. In the pre-treatment era, activation of CD8 T cells was linked to morbid outcomes like opportunistic infections. And the expansion of CD8 T cells and the resultant low ratio of CD4 to CD8 is a powerful predictor of the new morbidities that we see in the treatment era, such as cardiovascular disease. So how does this happen? How would we anticipate that expanded numbers of CD8 T cells, the epidemiological risk link is clear, but mechanistically, how do these CD8 T cells cause disease? Well, the answer is you don't really know. This is the model that we're going to present to you. First off, what is it that expands CD8 T cells? It's two things, one of which is high levels of the homeostatic cytokine interleukin-15. In some work from our group that was published last year, we can see the lymph nodes, the organ wherein T cells mature, learn their jobs, are enriched for expression of interleukin-15 in untreated patients. This normalizes when they're on antiviral therapy. But importantly, the levels of interleukin-15 in the lymph node are directly correlated with absolute numbers of circulating CD8 positive T cells. And one of the jobs of interleukin-15, we know that this does this. Interleukin-15 can activate a variety of cell populations, natural killer cells, CD8 positive T cells, to proliferate and expand. It's what IL-15 does. Another thing that interleukin-15 does is it makes CD8 T cells that it sees more cytolytic. Now, we can measure cytolytic potential in CD8 T cells by looking at the expression of granzyme B, which is an enzyme that lyses the cell after a hole is punched by perforin. And we can also look at the expression of perforin in these cells. I'm going to show you the granzyme B data. First, we have an HIV healthy control. Here we have an untreated HIV-positive patient. The x-axis represents granzyme B, and you can see that the granzyme B-positive cells are increased dramatically in our patients with HIV infection, and even more importantly, the cells that are reactive to HIV, to influenza peptides, to cytomegalovirus peptides are especially enriched for expression of the cytolytic molecule, and the same is the case for perforin. Interleukin-15 drives the expression of these cytolytic molecules, as we can see in this graph, where we look at the baseline expression of granzyme B in a healthy control. In the absence of cytokine, very few of these cells that are CMV reactive express much granzyme B, but IL-15 drives broad expansion of granzyme B expression in CMV reactive cells. I'm showing you this in influenza reactive cells and in the general population that we don't see as much with these other cytokines that can affect these cells. All right, so IL-15 can drive expansion of CD8 cells and make CD8 cells have cytolytic potential. What about homing molecules? Here we look at the same receptor that we talked about before, the fructokine receptor, that allows cells, in principle, to accumulate on the endothelial surface. We look at CD4 cells in the left, on the right, rather, and CD8 cells on the left, and here's expression of CX3CR1 and fractalkine receptor. It's important to note that CD4 cells do not express the fractalkine receptor at all, or at least very minimally, but CD8 cells do. And as they become more mature, from naive central memory to effector memory to terminally differentiated effector memory cells, the frequency with which these CD8 T cells express the fractalkine receptor increases. So as cells become more mature, more senescent, they have higher expression of this receptor that allows them to accumulate, we think, on the endothelium. Now, what is the expression of fractalkine receptor in patients with HIV infection? Well, in fact, as you would expect, it is elevated compared to negative controls. The frequency of fractalkine receptor positive cells is increased in our treated HIV infection, and these cells are excluded from lymph nodes, but are enriched in the blood, as we can see in both HIV negative and HIV positive people, and they are inversely correlated with the CD4 CD8 T cell ratio. Now, here's a very important slide. When we look at the fractalkine receptor positive cells in HIV negative and HIV positive patients, the frequency with which the HIV positive patients' fractalkine receptor positive cells express PAR1 is dramatically increased, both in the CCR7 positive cells home to lymph nodes and the CX3CR1 positive cells that are in blood. On average, more than 80% of the fractalkine receptor positive cells express the protease activated receptor PAR1. Now, why is that important? Well, the reason that that's important is that PAR1 is a receptor that is cleaved and activated by thrombin, one of the elements in the coagulation cascade. So if we activate coagulation, thrombin is generated that can activate PAR1. So here's another wrinkle. What's the role of CMV? Well, it turns out that the dramatic CD8 T cell expansion that we see in HIV disease is only seen in people who are CMV co-infected. When we look at the CD8 T cell counts of HIV positive people who are CMV seronegative, and they're rare, they're less than 10% of our HIV infected population is CMV seronegative. Their CD8 T cell counts are pretty much in the normal range, about 500 per microliter. Usually it's a little bit elevated, but the dramatic elevation that we see is seen primarily in the CMV seropositive individuals. So somehow CMV also drives CD8 T cell expansion. And this is a fascinating aspect of CMV. This is a dramatically immunodominant virus, such that in the HIV positive population, as many as half of all the circulating CD8 T cells can be shown to respond to CMV peptides. I don't know of another virus that is so dominant in terms of driving CD8 T cell expansion, specifically targeting the peptides of that virus. What about those cells? There's something really interesting about those cells. CMV reactive cells are typically differentiated. They move down on the spectrum of T cell differentiation, and as such, they have high expression of CX3CR1 on the x-axis, CMV-specific CD8 cells on here in red, and high expression of PAR1. So they have a fractalkine receptor that lets them accumulate on the endothelium, and the protease activated receptor type 1 that allows them to get activated by products of fibrinolysis. Am I too late? Do I have more time? Yeah, I think I still have a little more time. All right. Now, to cut to the chase. I told you that there's fractalkine expressed on the surface of endothelial cells, and here we can see it. In green, we have the ligand, fractalkine, CX3CL1, on the endothelial cell, and this is that identifies the nucleus. So endothelial cells are enriched with fractalkine, and we can upregulate fractalkine expression by exposure to the microbial elements that are increased in the plasma of persons with HIV infection. Do CD8 T cells and monocytes accumulate on the endothelium in HIV infection? Well, we haven't had the opportunity to look at the blood vessels of persons with HIV disease, but we have had the opportunity of looking at the blood vessels of rhesus macaques that are infected with a virus like HIV called SIV, simian immunodeficiency virus, or SHIV, a chimer of HIV and SIV. And what's very clear in these data here by Shomopanagrahi is that on the vascular wall of a SHIV of an uninfected animal, there's not much in terms of inflammatory infiltrate, but in the SHIV positive animals, there's plenty of inflammatory cells, and these cells are CD8 positive, CD68 positive monocytes, and the overlay tells us they're in close proximity. And here's summary data on lots of animals showing the infected animals with CD8 T cell infiltrates, the infected animals with monocyte infiltrates on their vascular endothelium. But these endothelia in HIV infection do something more. The other thing that they do is they seem to express lots of interleukin-15, which was a bit of a surprise to us. So here are the interleukin-15 immunostaining on SHIV-infected animals and uninfected controls. These differences are really quite dramatic. And if we treat these cells, endothelial cells, with bacterial products for 7 days, the interleukin-15 expression increases dramatically. And here are the summary data on the levels of interleukin-15 on these endothelial cells in vitro. So this is the model that I'm going to try to leave you with, and I'll walk you through it. This is a summary of everything I've shown. We have, this is a blood vessel. This is a blood vessel here. This is a monocyte attracted to fractalkine on the endothelial surface by expression of CX3CR1. HIV can induce that monocyte to upregulate tissue factor. I haven't shown you those data, but it does so probably through interaction with toll receptor 7 and 8 in these cells. Oxidized LDL, I've shown you this, does the same. Bacterial LPS does the same. It makes these cells more inflammatory. It activates tissue factor to cleave factor 7. That results in the formation of a fibrin clot, but an intermediate is thrombin, which is a protease that interacts with PAR1 on the surface of CD8 T cells, monocytes, and platelets. On the CD8 T cells, PAR1 stimulation results in activation of these cells to express more inflammatory cytokines, and we're asking now whether it also promotes the ability of these cells to transmigrate through the endothelial layer. These CD8 T cells are brought in close proximity in HIV disease to these monocytes by expression of CX3CR1, a fractalkine receptor. And there, they are exposed to interleukin-15 that's elaborated both by endothelial cells and muscularis cells. I haven't shown you that data, but that looks pretty good too. And so we have this conspiracy where these cells are activated to be more cytolytic by IL-15 to cause damage to the autologous endothelium, perhaps to transmigrate and to participate in the formation of clot. Now, what's the role of CMV? Well, CMV does one thing. It expands these CD8 T cells and makes them more terminally differentiated, so it gives them the phenotype that's likely to be damaging to the endothelium. But how does this actually happen? How does CMV induce cardiovascular disease? The epidemiology is clear. It's clear that people who are CMV co-infected are at greater risk for cardiovascular disease in HIV infection. And how does it do this? Well, one, as we heard earlier, it can infect endothelial cells. And we've learned from Ellen's work that the DNA in plaque and plasma are linked to indices of T cell activation and cardiovascular risk. But the question that we're not sure about is how does this activation take place? Is this mediated through immune recognition of CMV, or are there other mechanisms more important? We've got a bet here. I think it's the latter. Some of my colleagues think it's the former. And our job is to sort that out, which we're going to do in the next couple of years. So here are the people who are responsible for this work at CASE. Nick Funderburg, who's done a lot of the monocyte work. Mike Freeman and Sue Hale, who've done a lot of the CD8 T cell work. David Zeider is a living cardiologist, so we have our we have some sort of grounding in the principles of cardiovascular disease, and Soumyapanagarahi, who has done the non-climate work. The plaque project, which I'm very eager to initiate, and we actually have initiated it, but I'm eager to see the outcome, is in collaboration with Manya, with Elena, and with Murad, and hopefully we'll be able to tell you more about this sometime. So thank you for your attention. I think that's it.